My psychiatrist said my stalker wasn't real. Then he broke into my session and stabbed her. Dr. Vivian Thorngate crossed her legs and adjusted her reading glasses while I explained for the third time why I knew someone was following me. Her office smelled like lavender and leather, expensive and clinical. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined with psychiatric texts, diplomas from prestigious universities covering one wall, a modernist painting that probably cost more than my car hanging behind her desk. She'd been my therapist for 6 months, specializing in anxiety disorders and trauma. My previous therapist had referred me after my panic attacks became unmanageable. I trusted Dr. Thorngate completely, which made her dismissal even more devastating. He was outside my apartment again last night. I saw him through the window standing across the street under the lamppost. Same gray jacket, same baseball cap. He stood there for 2 hours. I timed it. Dr. Thorngate made a note on her tablet, her expression neutral. "And did you call the police?" I shook my head. "They came the first 3 times I called. They never found anyone. The officer told me I needed to stop wasting their time with paranoid delusions. He actually used those words." She nodded slowly. "Maya, we've discussed this pattern before. Your anxiety manifests as hypervigilance. You're seeing threats that aren't there because your nervous system is stuck in fight or flight mode. This is a classic presentation of generalized anxiety disorder with paranoid features." I pulled out my phone, opened the Photos app, showed her the screenshots I'd been collecting. "But look at these. This is from the grocery store security camera last week. See that man in the background behind me in the cereal aisle? That's him. And this one from the coffee shop 2 days ago. Same man, 3 tables away. And this one from outside my gym. He's always there." Dr. Thorngate glanced at the photos for maybe 5 seconds. "Maya, those are different men. You're experiencing pareidolia, seeing patterns where none exist. The mind does this when it's hypervigilant. Every tall man in a dark jacket becomes your stalker. Every stranger who happens to be in the same public space becomes evidence of conspiracy." Her tone was gentle but firm, the voice of someone who'd explained this same concept to hundreds of anxious patients. "But they're not different men. Look at the jawline, the way he stands with his weight on his left leg, that scar on his right hand. It's the same person." She set her tablet down and leaned forward with that practiced therapeutic posture that was supposed to make me feel heard. "Maya, I need you to consider the possibility that your perception is being distorted by your anxiety. You've experienced significant trauma. Your assault 3 years ago left you with understandable trust issues and fear of men. But you're now seeing danger everywhere you look, and that's preventing you from living your life." The assault. She always came back to the assault. Yes, I'd been attacked in college by someone I thought was a friend. Yes, I'd developed PTSD afterward. Yes, I had trust issues and hypervigilance. But this was different. This was real. I know the difference between anxiety and actual danger. Someone is following me. He knows where I live, where I work, where I go. He's been doing this for 2 months. I have documentation, photos, a timeline. Why won't you believe me?" Dr. Thorngate's expression shifted to what I'd started calling her intervention face. Eyebrows slightly raised, mouth set in a line of professional concern. "Maya, this fixation on being followed is consuming your life. You've stopped going to yoga classes you loved. You've avoided social events. You're calling in sick to work because you're convinced someone is watching your office building. This isn't anxiety management. This is anxiety controlling you. We need to discuss increasing your medication dosage and perhaps adding an antipsychotic to help with the paranoid ideation." Antipsychotic. She wanted to put me on antipsychotics because I'd noticed someone following me. I felt my chest tighten, that familiar panic rising. But this time, it wasn't about the stalker. It was about being dismissed, gaslit, told my reality wasn't real by someone I'd trusted to help me. "I'm not having psychotic breaks. I'm not delusional. Someone is actually following me, and you're telling me to take medication that will make me question my own perception even more." My voice was rising, and I forced myself to breathe, to stay calm, to not prove her diagnosis right by losing control. Dr. Thorngate made another note. "Your resistance to treatment is concerning. When patients refuse to consider that their perception might be distorted, it often indicates a deeper issue. Have you been taking your current medications as prescribed?" I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw my phone at her expensive painting. Instead, I stood up and grabbed my jacket. "I'm not coming back. I need a therapist who will listen to me, not one who's decided I'm crazy and interprets everything I say through that lens." She didn't try to stop me, just made another note on her tablet and said in that maddeningly calm voice, "The door is always open when you're ready to engage with treatment seriously, Maya, but I can't help you if you won't help yourself." I left her office, took the elevator down from the 8th floor, walked out into the February cold feeling more alone than I'd felt since the assault. If my own therapist didn't believe me, who would? I drove home checking my mirrors obsessively. No gray jacket, no baseball cap. Maybe Dr. Thorngate was right. Maybe I was seeing patterns where none existed. Maybe my trauma had broken my ability to distinguish between real threats and imagined ones. My apartment felt too exposed when I got home. Ground floor corner unit with big windows that let in lots of natural light, which had been a selling point when I moved in but now felt dangerous. I closed all the blinds, checked that the door was locked, put a chair against it for extra security. My roommate Lauren was at her boyfriend's place for the weekend, so I was alone. I heated up leftover pasta and tried to watch TV, but I couldn't focus. Every sound from outside made me jump. Every car passing on the street made me check the window. At 11 p.m., my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You looked upset leaving your appointment today. I hope you're okay." My hands shook so badly I almost dropped the phone. He knew. He knew I'd been to therapy. He'd been watching the building. I took a screenshot, then another, making sure I captured the phone number and timestamp. Then I called the police. The dispatcher sounded bored. "What's your emergency?" "Someone's been stalking me for 2 months. He just sent me a text message referencing my therapy appointment today. He was watching me." She took my address and said an officer would come by. 2 hours later, Officer Daniels knocked on my door. He was in his 50s, overweight, with the tired expression of someone who'd responded to too many calls from paranoid young women. I showed him the text message, showed him my folder of photos and documentation, explained the pattern of following and surveillance. He barely looked at the evidence. "Miss Reeves, this text could be from anyone. A friend checking in on you, someone who saw you walking and noticed you seemed upset. There's nothing threatening in the message itself. But it's from an unknown number and it references my therapy appointment. How would a friend know I was at therapy unless they were following me?" Officer Daniels closed his notebook. "Have you considered that your therapy appointment is at a regular time each week? If someone knows your schedule, which could be anyone you've mentioned it to, they could make an educated guess. This isn't evidence of stalking. It's evidence of someone expressing concern." The way he said it made it clear he thought I was wasting his time. Again. "Your therapist has noted in previous police reports that you're experiencing anxiety-related paranoia. Maybe you should focus on your treatment instead of calling us every few days about imagined threats." He left. I sat on my couch staring at the text message until my eyes burned. Either everyone was right and I was losing my grip on reality, or I was being gaslit by every authority figure I'd turned to for help. I didn't know which possibility terrified me more. The text continued over the next week. "You should eat something. You skipped lunch today. New haircut looks nice. Be careful walking home in the dark." Each one demonstrating knowledge of my daily activities, my movements, my appearance. I stopped responding to Dr. Thorngate's appointment reminder calls. I couldn't sit in her office and be told I was imagining this while my phone collected evidence. Instead, I started documenting everything myself. I bought a small camera that I wore clipped to my jacket, recording whenever I left the apartment. I kept detailed logs of every sighting, every text message, every moment I felt watched. I joined online forums for stalking victims and learned about evidence collection, about legal standards for restraining orders, about the systematic failure of law enforcement to take stalking seriously until someone got hurt. The other victims' stories were horrifying. Woman after woman describing the same pattern: stalking, police dismissal, escalation, violence, and only then did anyone believe them. I wasn't going to be another statistic. Lauren noticed the camera and the obsessive documentation. "Maya, this isn't healthy. You're spiraling. Please go back to Dr. Thorngate. You need help." Even my best friend thought I was crazy. I tried to explain the texts, the evidence, but she just looked at me with pity. "Lots of people get weird spam texts. You're connecting dots that aren't connected because you're scared. I love you, but I'm worried about you. This paranoia is getting worse, not better." I moved out 2 weeks later. I couldn't stay somewhere where even my roommate thought I was delusional. I found a studio apartment on the 4th floor of a building with security cameras and a locked entrance. No ground floor windows, no easy access. I paid extra for the safety features, drained my savings account, didn't care. The text stopped for a few days after I moved. I let myself hope that maybe changing locations had disrupted his surveillance. Maybe he'd lose interest. Maybe I could finally breathe. Then I came home from work to find a package outside my door. No return address, just my name written in block letters. Inside was a framed photo of me sleeping, in my new apartment, in my bed, taken through the window from the fire escape. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. He'd been inside my building, he'd been outside my window while I slept. He'd photographed me in my most vulnerable moment and mailed it to me as proof that I was never safe. I called 911, and this time I didn't stop screaming until they promised to send someone immediately. Detective Rachel Kovacs showed up an hour later with Officer Daniels. She was younger, sharper, took notes on everything I said. She photographed the package, the photo, bagged them as evidence. She looked at my documentation folder, my timeline, my text message screenshots. For the first time since this started, someone was actually listening. "This is stalking, Miss Reeves. Clear pattern of escalating surveillance and psychological intimidation. The photo is especially concerning because it demonstrates he has physical access to your building and is willing to violate your personal space." Relief hit me so hard I started crying. Finally, someone believed me. Officer Daniels interrupted. "Detective Kovacs, you should know that Miss Reeves has a documented history of anxiety and paranoia. Her psychiatrist has filed reports indicating she's experiencing delusional ideation. We need to consider the possibility that she staged this herself as proof of her imagined stalker." The relief shattered. Detective Kovacs looked between Officer Daniels and me, her expression shifting from concern to professional skepticism. Is that true? Are you currently in psychiatric treatment for paranoid delusions? I felt the trap closing around me. If I admitted I'd been seeing Dr. Thorngate, my credibility was destroyed. If I lied, they'd find out anyway. I was seeing a psychiatrist for anxiety related to a previous assault, but I stopped going because she wouldn't listen when I reported the stalking. She decided I was delusional and refused to consider that I was actually being followed. That's not the same as being crazy. Detective Kovacs' expression shifted to something that looked like pity. Miss Reeves, is it possible that your previous trauma is causing you to interpret normal events as threatening? Could this photo be something you took yourself during a dissociative episode or anxiety attack? I wanted to break something. Why would I stalk myself? Why would I terrorize myself? I'm showing you evidence of a crime and you're suggesting I'm doing this to myself? She stood up, leaving the bagged evidence on my table. We'll investigate, but I need to be honest with you. Cases involving victims with psychiatric histories are difficult to prosecute. Defense attorneys shred our credibility in court. My advice is to continue your therapy and focus on managing your anxiety. If the stalking is real, we'll find evidence. If it's not, treatment will help. They left. Both of them. Took my evidence and left me alone with the knowledge that even when I had proof, no one would believe me because Dr. Thorngate had labeled me delusional. Her diagnosis had become a weapon that my stalker could hide behind. I thought about that framed photo for hours. The angle suggested he'd been on the fire escape, which meant he'd climbed up from the alley. The building's security cameras didn't cover the back. He knew that. He'd done research, found the blind spots, exploited them. This was planned, methodical, escalating, and everyone thought I was doing it to myself. 3 days later, I got another text. They didn't believe you. That must hurt. He was watching. He knew the police had come. He knew they'd dismissed me. He was enjoying this, the power of being invisible while I was gaslit into questioning my own sanity. I didn't call the police again. What was the point? Instead, I went online and hired a private investigator. His name was Thomas Brenner, former police detective who now ran a private firm specializing in stalking cases. His website featured testimonials from women who'd been ignored by law enforcement until Brenner collected evidence that forced the system to act. He cost $200 an hour. I didn't care. I met him at a coffee shop downtown. He was in his 40s, graying hair, tired eyes that had seen too much. I laid out my entire documentation folder, walked him through the timeline, showed him the texts and the photo. He studied everything carefully, asked detailed questions about patterns, locations, timing. Finally, he looked up and said the words I'd been desperate to hear for months. You're being stalked. Professional-level surveillance. This isn't some amateur following you randomly. This is someone with training, someone who knows how to avoid detection. The fact that he's targeting your therapy appointments and communicating with you about them suggests he's trying to isolate you by destroying your credibility with authority figures. That's sophisticated psychological warfare. I started crying again. Not from fear this time, from vindication. Someone finally believed me. Thomas leaned forward. Here's what I need you to understand. Stalkers escalate. Right now, he's in the surveillance and intimidation phase. But that photo he sent you? That's a warning. He's showing you he can reach you anywhere. The next phase is usually physical confrontation. We need to identify him before that happens. He took my case. For the next month, Thomas conducted counter-surveillance operations, following me at a distance and documenting everyone who showed unusual interest in my movements. He pulled security footage from businesses near my apartment and workplace. He traced the phone number from the text through telecom records, finding it was a burner phone purchased with cash at a convenience store. No useful leads. But he did capture video. Clear footage of a man matching my description following me from my parking garage to my office. Gray jacket, baseball cap, distinctive gait favoring his left leg. Thomas froze frames, enhanced images, ran facial recognition through private databases. The match came back with a name, Julian Voss, 34 years old, former military intelligence, dishonorably discharged for stalking a female officer. He had 2 previous restraining orders, both filed by ex-girlfriends, both violated multiple times. He'd done 6 months in county jail for breaking into one girlfriend's home. This wasn't paranoia. This wasn't anxiety. This was a dangerous predator with a documented history of escalating stalking behavior, and he'd chosen me as his next target. Thomas compiled everything into a formal report with dozens of photos, enhanced surveillance footage, phone records, timeline analysis. He made 15 copies and handed them to me in his office. Take this to the police. Demand they file charges. You have enough evidence now that they can't dismiss you, even with your psychiatric history. But Maya, you need to understand something. Men like Julian Voss don't stop until they're in prison or dead. Even with a restraining order, he'll violate it. You need to take your safety seriously. I filed a police report with Detective Kovacs the next day, handed her Thomas's documentation package, and watched her expression change as she reviewed the evidence. This is solid work. I'll issue a warrant for his arrest on stalking charges and petition for an emergency restraining order, but Miss Reeves, I need to prepare you. Even if we arrest him, he'll likely make bail within 24 hours. Stalking charges rarely result in significant jail time unless the victim is physically harmed. You need a safety plan. I didn't have a safety plan. I just had fear and anger and a stack of evidence proving I'd been telling the truth all along. They arrested Julian Voss that afternoon at his apartment in Riverside, 40 minutes from my place. Detective Kovac called to tell me he'd been arraigned and bail was set at $50,000. He posted it within 3 hours using a bail bondsman. 12 hours after his arrest, Julian Voss was free. The emergency restraining order prohibited him from contacting me or coming within 500 feet of my home, workplace, or known associates. Violation would result in immediate arrest. The paper was supposed to protect me. I'd learned enough about the system by then to know paper didn't stop bullets. I bought pepper spray and a personal alarm. I changed my schedule randomly to avoid predictable patterns. I parked in different spots every day. I told my boss about the situation and he moved my desk to an interior office without windows. I did everything right. But Julian Voss had spent months learning my life. He knew I saw Dr. Thorngate every Thursday at 3 p.m. because I'd mentioned it in passing to Lauren once. He knew I'd stopped going, but he didn't know I was about to start again. Because despite everything, I needed help processing the trauma of being gaslit, dismissed, and hunted. And Dr. Thorngate was the only psychiatrist my insurance covered who specialized in PTSD. I called her office and scheduled an appointment. Her receptionist sounded surprised to hear from me. Dr. Thorngate will be pleased you've decided to re-engage with treatment, Maya. She's had an opening due to a cancellation. Can you come in Thursday at 3 p.m.? I almost said no. Almost told her to find a different time. But Thursday at 3 p.m. had been my regular slot for 6 months. It felt important to reclaim it, to not let Julian Voss take any more of my life than he already had. I said yes. That Thursday, I drove to Dr. Thorngate's office building with pepper spray in my coat pocket and Thomas Brenner's number on speed dial. The parking garage felt dangerous. Every shadow could hide a threat. But I made it to the elevator, up to the 8th floor, into the waiting room without incident. Dr. Thorngate's office door opened at exactly 3 p.m. She smiled at me with genuine warmth. Maya, I'm so glad you came back. Please come in. Her office looked exactly the same. Same leather couch, same lavender smell, same expensive painting. I sat down and she settled into her chair across from me, tablet on her lap. I received a call from Detective Kovac informing me of the stalking charges and arrest. Maya, I owe you an apology. I dismissed your concerns as paranoid ideation when you were reporting a genuine threat. That was a failure of clinical judgment on my part. The apology should have felt good. It didn't. It felt hollow, too late, earned only because police had validated what she should have believed from the start. You didn't just dismiss my concerns. You documented me as delusional, which made it nearly impossible for police to take me seriously. Your diagnosis was used against me by law enforcement as proof I was imagining the danger. I almost died because you decided I was crazy instead of listening to me. Dr. Thorngate looked uncomfortable, shifting in her chair. I understand you're angry. That's valid. But I want you to understand that from a clinical perspective, your presentation was consistent with anxiety-driven hypervigilance. Most patients who report stalking are experiencing fear generalization from previous trauma, not actual surveillance. I made a probabilistic judgment that turned out to be wrong in your specific case. That happens in medicine. The clinical detachment in her voice made my skin crawl. It happens in medicine? I was being hunted by a violent predator and you told me I was imagining it. That's not a statistical error. That's negligence. She made a note on her tablet, the same gesture she'd made countless times when dismissing my stalking reports. Maya, this anger is understandable, but it's not productive for your healing. We need to work through your trauma from both the assault and the stalking, and that requires you to engage with therapy rather than attack me for past clinical decisions. Can we move forward? I opened my mouth to respond when the waiting room door slammed open. Heavy footsteps. A man's voice shouting. Where is she? Where's Maya? Dr. Thorngate's face went white. She stood up, moved toward her office door. Who are you? You can't be in here. I'm calling security. The door to her office burst open. Julian Voss stood in the doorway wearing his gray jacket, baseball cap pulled low, but his face was visible now. Sharp features, cold eyes, that scar on his right hand exactly where I documented it. He was real, standing right there, holding a knife. Dr. Thorngate stepped between us, her voice shaking but firm. You need to leave immediately. I've pressed the panic button. Police are on their way. He smiled, actually smiled. Good. I want them to see this. I want everyone to understand that she's mine, that no one protects her but me. He moved toward me and Dr. Thorngate didn't think. She just reacted, putting her body between me and the knife, grabbing his arm to stop him. The knife plunged into her chest below her collarbone. Blood bloomed across her white blouse. She made a gasping sound and staggered backward, hitting her desk. Julian pulled the knife out and raised it again. I grabbed the heavy glass paperweight from Dr. Thorngate's desk and smashed it into the side of Julian's head with every ounce of strength I had. He stumbled, dropped the knife, blood streaming down his temple. I grabbed Dr. Thorngate and pulled her toward the door, my hands slippery with her blood. She was conscious but barely, her breathing rapid and shallow. We made it to the waiting room as Julian recovered and came after us. The receptionist was screaming into the phone with 911. I grabbed a chair and threw it at Julian. Anything to slow him down, to keep distance between him and us. He kicked it aside and lunged. I hit him with the pepper spray directly in the eyes. He screamed, clawing at his face. and I pulled Dr. Thorngate toward the elevator. Blood was everywhere. On my hands, my clothes, the floor. Dr. Thorngate was trying to speak, but only managing wet, bubbling sounds. The knife had punctured her lung. The elevator doors opened, and building security rushed out, saw the scene, saw Julian Voss stumbling blind with pepper spray in his eyes and blood on his hands. They tackled him, held him down while he thrashed and screamed about protecting me, about how I belonged to him, about how no one understood our connection. Police arrived 4 minutes later. Paramedics arrived 3 minutes after that. They loaded Dr. Thorngate onto a stretcher and rushed her to the ambulance, one paramedic holding pressure on the stab wound while another worked to stabilize her breathing. Detective Kovac took my statement while I sat on the hallway floor covered in Dr. Thorngate's blood. He violated the restraining order. He must have followed you here. Did you see him in the parking garage or lobby? I shook my head. I didn't see him until he was in the office. He knew my appointment time. He's been tracking my schedule for months. He knew exactly when and where I'd be. Julian Voss was arrested for attempted murder, aggravated assault, stalking, and violating a restraining order. No bail this time. He was held in county jail pending trial. Dr. Thorngate survived the surgery but spent 2 weeks in ICU. The knife had collapsed her lung and come within centimeters of her heart. Half an inch to the left and she would have died on her office floor. I visited her in the hospital once she was conscious enough for visitors. She looked small in the hospital bed, diminished without her professional armor. Tubes and wires connecting her to machines monitoring her recovery. She saw me and tears immediately filled her eyes. Maya, I'm so sorry. I should have believed you. I should have taken your report seriously instead of filtering everything through diagnostic bias. My failure to listen almost got us both killed. I sat in the chair next to her bed. You saved my life. You put yourself between me and a knife to protect me even though you'd spent months telling me I was paranoid. She reached for my hand and I let her take it. I've been a psychiatrist for 20 years. I've seen hundreds of patients with anxiety and trauma. Somewhere along the way, I started seeing patterns instead of people. I stopped listening to what my patients were actually telling me and started hearing what I expected to hear based on their diagnoses. You reported a credible threat with evidence, and I dismissed it because I'd already decided you were experiencing paranoid ideation. That's medical malpractice. I've filed a report with the state medical board documenting my failure and requesting they investigate my patient care practices. I wasn't expecting that. Self-reporting to the medical board was career suicide. Why would you do that? She squeezed my hand gently. Because you weren't the first patient I dismissed. You were just the first one who nearly died because of it. After you left my practice, I reviewed my case files. 3 other women had reported stalking or harassment in the past 2 years. I diagnosed all of them with anxiety-related paranoia and increased their medication instead of taking their reports seriously. I contacted all 3. 2 confirmed their stalkers were real and had been arrested after escalating to violence. The 3rd disappeared and I can't locate her. I don't know if she's alive. My pattern of dismissing women's reports of danger has caused measurable harm. I need to be held accountable. The trial happened 8 months later. Julian Voss was charged with attempted murder, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, aggravated stalking, and violation of a restraining order. The prosecution had overwhelming evidence: surveillance footage, witness testimony, the knife with his fingerprints, the documented stalking pattern. His defense attorney tried to argue mental illness, claiming Julian had developed an erotomatic delusion where he believed I was in love with him and was sending coded messages through my daily routines. The prosecution demolished that argument by presenting evidence of Julian's previous stalking cases. This wasn't mental illness. This was a pattern of predatory behavior targeting vulnerable women. He'd learned from military intelligence training how to conduct surveillance without detection. He'd used those skills to terrorize at least 4 women over the past decade, escalating each time. I testified for 2 hours, walked the jury through the timeline of stalking, the police dismissals, the psychiatric gaslighting, the photo of me sleeping, the moment Julian Voss burst into Dr. Thorngate's office with a knife. The defense attorney tried to rattle me during cross-examination. Miss Reeves, isn't it true you were diagnosed with paranoid ideation by Dr. Thorngate? Isn't it possible you misinterpreted Mr. Voss's innocent interest as stalking due to your previous trauma? I looked him directly in the eyes. I was diagnosed as paranoid because Dr. Thorngate didn't believe women who reported being stalked. She's admitted that under oath. My previous trauma didn't make me paranoid. It made me vigilant enough to notice when a dangerous predator was hunting me. The fact that authority figures dismissed my reports doesn't mean I was wrong. It means they failed. Dr. Thorngate testified next. She described her failure to take my stalking reports seriously, her diagnostic bias, her pattern of dismissing women's safety concerns. She brought her case file reviews showing 3 other patients she'd failed similarly. She'd voluntarily surrendered her license to practice psychiatry pending the medical board investigation. Her testimony was devastating to the defense's mental illness argument. If I'd been genuinely delusional, my psychiatrist wouldn't be testifying that she'd been wrong to diagnose me that way. The jury deliberated for 6 hours, guilty on all counts. Julian Voss was sentenced to 23 years in prison with no possibility of parole for 18 years. The judge cited his previous stalking convictions, the premeditated nature of his surveillance, and the extreme violence of his attack in determining the sentence. As they led him out of the courtroom, he turned and looked at me one last time. No remorse, no recognition of what he'd done, just cold calculation. He'd probably already planning his next target for when he got out. The civil suit against the police department was more complicated. My attorney argued that Officer Daniels' repeated dismissals of my stalking reports, despite documented evidence, constituted deliberate indifference to my safety. The department's defense was that officers used reasonable judgment based on my psychiatric history and the lack of physical evidence during initial reports. We settled for $220,000 without going to trial. The settlement included mandatory training for all officers on stalking response protocols and how to evaluate reports from victims with mental health histories. Officer Daniels was demoted and transferred to desk duty. Not enough, but something. The medical board investigation into Dr. Thorngate took 18 months. They reviewed her entire patient history, interviewed former patients, evaluated her treatment protocols. Their findings were damning. Dr. Thorngate had systematically dismissed women's reports of stalking, harassment, and abuse for over a decade, preferring to diagnose anxiety and paranoia rather than consider external threats. At least 12 patients had reported genuine danger that she'd categorized as delusional. 2 of those patients were later murdered by their stalkers. Dr. Thorngate's license was permanently revoked. She could never practice psychiatry again. She didn't appeal. Instead, she started teaching medical ethics at a university, focusing on diagnostic bias and the dangers of dismissing patient testimony. She published a paper titled "When Clinical Judgment Becomes Clinical Gaslighting," a case study in systematic failure, detailing her failures and calling for reform in how mental health professionals evaluate patient safety reports. I started a foundation called Believed. We provide free private investigation services for stalking victims whose reports are dismissed by law enforcement. We connect victims with attorneys who specialize in protective orders and civil suits. We train law enforcement on taking stalking seriously, regardless of victim mental health history. Thomas Brenner runs the investigation division. Dr. Thorngate serves on the advisory board, using her experience as a cautionary tale. In the first year, we helped 37 stalking victims document their cases and obtain restraining orders. 3 of those cases resulted in arrests before the stalking escalated to violence. 3 women who might have ended up dead if they'd been dismissed the way I was. I still have nightmares about the office, about blood on my hands, about the wet sound the knife made entering Dr. Thorngate's chest, about Julian Voss's cold eyes. Therapy helps. My new psychiatrist, Dr. Kenji Osman, actually listens when I describe triggers or concerns. He doesn't dismiss my experiences as paranoia. He doesn't gaslight me into questioning my perception. He treats me as a reliable narrator of my own life. That's all I ever wanted, to be believed. The scar on my palm from where I gripped the paperweight too hard reminds me every day that being right almost wasn't enough. If Julian had been faster, if Dr. Thorngate hadn't stepped between us, if building security had been slower, I'd be dead. And everyone who dismissed me would have spent the rest of their lives knowing they'd helped kill me through their negligence. Justice feels incomplete. Julian Voss will eventually leave prison. Dr. Thorngate lost her career, but 2 women still died because she didn't listen to them. Officer Daniels still collects a pension. The system that failed me continues failing other women every single day. But I'm alive. Dr. Thorngate is alive. And 37 women have evidence and protection they wouldn't have had without Believed. It's not enough. It will never be enough. But it's something. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.